is always my problem anyway. I'm going to share something that I don't typically say because it's kind of personal, but I was telling this to a couple of brothers. You may not believe it. I don't like standing in front of people and speaking. It's work. But something happened years ago, and it was pointed out by someone that I believe had the gift of discernment, that you have the gift of teaching, you must use it. And so here I am. But that's one reason that, other than the fact that last week it was just hot in here, my sweat's dripping off of me at the end, and also last week I found out, I realized late in the event that one reason I wasn't feeling well was I actually had a little blood sugar, which is rare for me, but suddenly unfortunately I grabbed a cookie and of course got prayed over, and that was a big thing. But it's one reason I was up there shaking at the beginning as well. We're going to look at two churches out of the 7 there in Revelation this morning, because they have some similarities and message to them, and many people believe they're although all the churches have. Is this too far away from the mountain? Ooh. Let's get this. Is that better? Okay. I can't see what I'm doing when I put this on. All the churches have some things that relate to the modern church in terms of the problems they were facing, but 2 in particular seem to have more in common with Christianity and Western culture than the others. And those are Sardis and Laodicea. And while this still may be, uncomfortable a little bit, hopefully it won't be quite as uncomfortable for some as I think it was last week. Because I was not intentionally trying to step on people's political sensitivities last week, but I wanted people to realize that there have been times in our country when people of faith were persecuted for their faith and their convictions. And since what their convictions were are inconsistent with what a lot of people believe now, this is one of those things that, what do you do with that? But on the other hand, some of us do hold those, but it's a matter of choice and again, a choice of conviction. I'm going to read. Well, first I'm going to pose a question to you. And I was telling some brothers, I don't know, I'm not sure I know the right answer, or if there is a right answer. But it's something for you to think about, and maybe we'll discuss some later. Is it possible that a live heresy is better than the dead orthodoxy? Is it possible that a live heresy is better than the dead orthodoxy? We understand the term heresy and orthodoxy here, I hope. And as a point there, I'll say that we're all aware of Jesus' interactions with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and mostly it was interaction with the Pharisees. Some pretty harsh interactions. And what's interesting there is, in terms of traditional Jewish thought and teaching, the Sadducees were the orthodox ones, and the Pharisees were out there. In fact, as their name literally means like the Persians. They were saying that they were adopting these Persian thoughts and philosophies in some of their practice. And yet, who did Jesus interact with most? Have the most challenge with? Not the Orthodox ones, but the ones who were doing something. The ones who had the ear of the people, and the ones who were doing something. Yes?
Could that possibly be because the ones that are doing something were actually getting up and moving, and they were studying and listening, whereas the other ones had already fixed their thought. They already fixed their thought on their orthodoxy, and nobody was going to change it, and they weren't going to get up and do anything.
Yeah, you're reading ahead. But that's very much so. Typically those who feel like, who hold an orthodox position, feel like they've arrived. In fact, this is where we're jumping ahead too, but in some respects, one of the legitimate criticisms of our heritage, the Restoration movement, is that we hit a point where we thought we'd arrived. Oh, we've restored the church. Restored what? Did we restore practice in terms of worship or in terms of teaching? Did we restore the work that was being done of the early church? See, we have the unique situation of having built a theology, of, let's say, worship and practice when we assemble, which is built on Scripture, which is good, except most of those Scriptures were written to correct error. So we've tried to build a system of theology around our practices in worship and practices in church, around Paul primarily and Peter some correcting problems in the church. So how do you get to what you're supposed to do by reading about, well, try to avoid this? And I'm not saying everything that's been done is wrong. It's just that when you reach that point where you think we've arrived, immobility happens, and an unwillingness to continue to search and think and grow. Well, first the churches. To the angel of the church in Sardis write, he who has the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars says this, I know your deeds, that you have a name that you are alive, but you are dead. Wake up and strengthen the things that remain, which were about to die, for I have not found your deeds completed in the sight of my God. So remember what you have received and heard, and keep it and repent. Therefore, if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what hour I will come to you. But you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their garments. They will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. He who overcomes will thus be clothed in white garments. I will not erase his name from the book of life. I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And over in 14. To the angel of the church in Laodicea write, the Amen, the faithful, the true witness, the beginning of the creation of God says this, I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. And the Greek literally is, I will vomit you out of my mouth. Because you say I am rich and have become wealthy and have need of nothing, and you do not know that you are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked, I advise you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may become rich, and white garments, so that you may clothe yourselves, and that the shame of your nakedness will not be revealed, and eye salve to anoint your eyes, so that you may see. Those whom I love I reprove and discipline. Therefore be zealous and repent. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and dine with him, and he with me. He who overcomes, I will grant to him to sit down with me on the throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. He who has an ear to hear, or an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. There are two, in terms of these messages, in light of all 7 messages, there are 2 things that seem to be missing in contrast with the other letters. You know what those are? Think back, if you think about what other things have been addressed. No thought? Nothing is said about the church being persecuted in either of these cases. And nothing is said about heresy. Something going on in terms of heresy in either of these cases. You know, you had the teaching of Balaam, you had that Jezebel of a woman, you had all these other, so in the other churches there were problems going on. And that the Lord wanted to address. And in all the other churches, they were under persecution. In this case, neither of those is being said. No persecution, no act of heresy. I went digging through all my church history texts, you know, okay, what can I learn? Is there anything there? And the closest thing to heresy that was referenced in Laodicea was that they were involved in an early church dispute about when is Easter. Because basically it was when is the Passover? What's the day of the Jewish Passover, and how you reference that for when Easter happens, when the resurrection, crucifixion, and resurrection happened. And that was it. No substantial evidence of evangelism, no person of notoriety there, just And in terms of Sardis, again, no significant persecution. There was a bishop there named Melito who was fairly well known. He died of natural causes. There was no persecution there. And his writings, actually, on one hand, were about the controversy happening in Laodicea. And about, when is the Passover, when is Easter. And the other was probably stimulated more persecution of the Jews, because he wrote strongly against the Jews, in support of the emperor's view of the Jews, and which resulted in more persecution there, but no persecution for his church. But there was nothing going on there. Now, one thing we discussed last week, that typically persecution occurs when you're active, when something there is happening that disturbs someone, whether it's refusing to pay homage to Caesar, whether it's teaching something that let's say in Ephesus, that is costing people money. If you recall the riots that occurred in Ephesus because the silversmiths were losing money because nobody was going to buy the trinkets for Artemis anymore. But those are the things that provoke resistance and persecution. And the risen Lord has said, okay, what's going on here? It's not that, again, we don't want to seek persecution, but we want enough spiritual activity in our church that somebody pays attention to it. That someone sees it and maybe resists it and doesn't like what they see and hear. And what about heresy? How does heresy emerge? Does heresy emerge when there's no spiritual activity? Well, when you're doing something teaching other than the Word, but I would say that typically that occurs only also where someone is teaching the Word. And some other people know this story as well as I do. I've related the story of what became known as the Crossroads movement in Florida and in the International Church of Christ and so forth. It was sort of a new legalism. But it began innocently enough because the church was actively evangelizing. They were converting so many people so quickly, particularly on the University of Florida campus, that they had no way to keep up with them all. And they didn't like the idea of all these people falling through the cracks. But even here, years ago, I was engaged in a survey trying to look at church growth and management and attendance and so forth. And the final word to the church leaders, and they knew this, but the final word to the church leaders is, if you're really concerned about growth, close the back door. Because there's many people slipping out to go somewhere else as they are coming in. So what are you going to do to manage those here? And then there in Florida, there was such concern about losing people who were the new Christians and teaching, making disciples of them, that this system developed of your prayer partners and accountability groups, and those things sound familiar, but it became to the point that the system was the thing more than the gospel was the thing. When they moved into a new place, yes, they were evangelizing and they were preaching, they were teaching many people, but with it came the system. If you're not doing it this way, you're not doing it the right way. And so in a sense, a new heresy was born, and a new legalism was born there. Why? Because something was happening. Something good was happening. If you're not doing something that disturbs Satan, he's not going to start pushing heresy out, different ideas at you. If you're not doing something that disturbs the status quo in the community around you, you're not going to meet resistance. So what we have here are two churches. One that, they're told, you're asleep, wake up. And by the way, that's the one when I had my interaction with Pete about, stealing this thunder. Sardis is where twice the city was overrun and conquered under siege because they weren't paying attention at the walls. And the soldiers were able to climb up the wall. The enemy soldiers were able to climb up the wall and go over the walls, up the mountain, up the cliff, over the walls, and conquer the city. And so to this church, church that lived in a city where twice they'd fallen because they were asleep at the guard, he says, wake up! What are you doing? Put something there of substance. And then in the case of Laodicea, I wasn't here when Pete taught on Laodicea, but in the case of Laodicea, not only is there no record of a persecution and no record of a heresy, the risen Lord didn't have anything good to say at all. And you're just lukewarm. You're tasteless. There's nothing about you that I like. So what are you going to do? And the reason, and in this case, it was a matter of you need to pay attention and put your wealth here, because they were a rich city. Apparently, it was a rich church, and with that was the sense that we have everything we need. I used to, a good friend of ours used to talk about developing a ministry to the up and outers. A lot of people try to reach the down and outers. A lot of people are trying to reach those who are struggling, and maybe these days not as many as should be. But what about those who have it all? Do they need grace too? Yes, they do. And this church desperately needed grace. They didn't realize it. So now I'll go back to that question I asked earlier. Is it possible that a live heresy is better than a dead orthodoxy? And we don't want heresy. We don't want false teaching in the church. But if there's a live heresy going on, that tells me that there was some sort of spiritual activity in the church that Satan is resisting. And there's something that's going on that he's trying to put a damper on. In the case of Laodicea in particular, why would Satan need to bother with anything? They're smug, they're affluent, they're good to go. In the case of Sardis, why would he need to attack them? Because they're pretty smug and secure in their themselves. Now, can you think why I said up front that these churches probably have more to do, or have more similarities with Christianity in our culture than the others? Yes.
Many years ago, one of my best friends out at Bell, where I worked, also happened to be my boss for last few years that he was there. He and I had known each other for a long time, and he's a Christian, a believer in Christ, and so we'd have a lot of talks about faith and about things. One of the last, and he's a member of one of the upper scale churches that's been in Fort Worth for a long time, over 100 years, I think. Anyway, we got to talking the last few years about what it would take to solve a lot of the world's problems and to cause peace to come about in the world. And his position was one that his church had taken, and they were doing something about it. They were firmly convinced that if we could educate the world, then we would have peace, we would have prosperity, and everything. Okay, so their church was actively helping schools and providing scholarships for people to get educated and so on and so forth. What do you see about that? We live in probably the most generously educated land in the world. And we've got the same problems right here in the United States that everybody else does, as far as the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and people steal, people kill, and so on. What prevents that? It isn't education. It's Jesus. And when a church loses sight of what their primary focus is, which I think is what you're talking about right here, and we have that in the United States, when an individual congregation loses sight of the fact that the head of my church is Jesus Christ, and I'm supposed to be his disciple, I need to do what he did, which was reach out to people and teach them about God.
Certainly education is part of the solution of the economic side of things, but education does not solve the spiritual side of things. Yes?
Yeah, so to your question, I think heresy is what's against this. You know, the virgin birth, Jesus, God came to earth and died and was resurrected. One of the most recent examples that I saw was a documentary on Martin Luther, where the Catholic Church was selling grace labors to build Rome, the cathedrals and those kind of things. That's heresy. All right, because grace is free. But later on, when Luther went through all of his problems as a result of holding the Catholic Church accountable, he was called a heretic.
Yep.
So it's not in the eye of the beholder. I was searching for the passage in the Old Testament where God tells the Jews that my people perish for lack of knowledge. And the shepherds at that time were responsible for educating the people, and they failed to do that. You could say that's heresy, but I don't believe that a live heresy, and I'm talking about it in the sense of the true definition of the word, against God's teaching, is ever better than orthodoxy.
No, I didn't say orthodoxy. I said a dead orthodoxy.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. Then I would have to go through and state what a dead orthodoxy is. But you know, if you're still declaring what is true, the truth, then look, we need to get up and we need to share the word. But so you'd have to define dead for me.
Okay.
So I don't know what that means.
Well, in terms of the church at Laodicea, no, in terms of Sardis, I mean, he says, you're dead. Then he says, wake up. So you're dead, but mostly so. Because there's something inert and powerless there. Again, I'm not saying I choose one or the other, but there's some. In this case, dead means nothing's happening, Jack.
You could also look at it as if these two churches were definitely called out.
Yeah.
Something was wrong. And being dead and being lukewarm is also a form of heresy. So that's a lie, and that's eating away at these two churches.
There are many things, thank you, many things that we could point at and say this is heresy. Is it an active teaching against the Word of God, which it seems to be the definition over here, or is it just denying the Word of God, denying His power? I've shared a story in here before that's still painful to tell because it involves some people that I know. But during the time of white flight, 60s and 70s over in Dallas, there was a church in Oak Cliff that over time had become, and I'm not going to say which church it was, had become, the neighborhood had changed. More and more of its members had moved out. They were still driving in to the city to attend this church. And around them, the neighborhoods were more and more colored. And they were struggling with that, mainly because they didn't have the courage and the faith to do something right. They had Vacation Bible School this summer, that one summer. And they had about 90 children come to Vacation Bible School from the neighborhoods around. All of them African American. None of them had any connection to that church. And after it was over, not one of those households was visited by a person from that church. There was no welcome. There was no attempt to reach out. There was no willingness to deal with their own bigotry. And within 9 months, that doors were closed. I would say the candlestick had been removed because of that heresy. That would we say, and we could look at it and say this is because it's against the teaching of God. So there are different things that we can associate with heresy. But in terms of the dead orthodoxy, if you get to the point you think we've arrived, we've got it made, we just keep doing this, then you become lethargic, you become uncreative, you become smug. Yes?
Where he says, you're dead, but then he says, behold, I stand at the door knocking,
Yeah.
gives me the picture that he's outside. He's not in here working with you.
Oh, he also says, you know, basically revive what's there. So it's like, so what's dead? You know, is it total? But he's, you know, there's this recognition that there's no activity there, no activity of faith there. I looked, you know, I was starting to bring in, it's good that I didn't do this because I would have messed things up since I haven't been using the projector. I just have a poster that I was looking for to see if I could find a picture of this thing. It's a little poster I had on my wall. It was this tree frog. And the tree frog had its front feet and arms on this limb, its head up there. And then its hind legs were up and feet on the same limb. Now, when you're in that position, a certain part of the anatomy is seriously exposed. You know, the rear end is hanging down. And the line on the poster was a quotation from Adlai Stevenson, all progress has resulted from those who took unpopular positions. And at times, the heresies come because people have taken unpopular positions, but they're trying to grow. You know? And I don't want the church to experience heresy, but I've seen it. I don't want the church to experience spiritual death, and I am certain I've seen that. So what do you do? How do we, am I doing time-wise? We're still watching. I'll check my, I'm still got plenty of time. But how do we deal with that? What if we say, well, we're rich? Or now, how many want to admit it not? We're rich, right? We live in a rich culture. When I was teaching at UTA, I would try to get my students to understand the contrast and the experience and you know, what your personal experiences are in contrast with those of the rest of the world. Now, we had some students there who really were struggling financially, and I recognize that. But even so, finally, the thing that got through to them was trying to put this contrast. I said, you need to understand that for some of you, your garbage disposal eats better than a significant portion of the world's population. We're rich. So if we're rich, what do we do when the Lord says, but really you're spiritually bankrupt? Or we're pretty well, this is nothing fancy, but it's, you know, compared to a lot of people, it's very fancy. But where the Lord says, but you're spiritually naked. We ought to see which I assume Pete mentioned this during his teaching class. I wasn't here that day. I was famous for eye salves, for healing eye salves. And he says, okay, you've got those, but you're spiritually blind. And unfortunately, I've been to that church. I'm not here. We're blessed here that there is a site, although there can be a tendency. Easy to fall into a practice that says, oh, we're doing fine. We're doing okay. But what do you do when those are the characteristics? You think you've got it all together and the Lord says, To the Laodicea, the message was, light a fire. Accept the discipline. Repent. And what I like there is in verse 19, he says, those whom I love, I discipline. And really that word there is phileo. Not, we got all different words. So in that case, it's, well, those people I care about. He's not even, for this church, he's not even ready to say, I have the agape love. You're kind of okay, and because you're okay, I don't like you, I'm going to discipline you. I'd like to bring you back where I truly love you. And what we need to understand as Christians is that, and I think this group knows, I've mentioned some of you, during my times of unemployment, which were long and painful, some of you personally took on my family's care. And other people in this church took on my family's care. It was a unique gift and a humbling gift. So many people here don't have the problem of what affluence can do, but we need to recognize that affluence does not guarantee love or acceptance or joy. Each year, billions of dollars go into advertising in this country, try to convince us that there's more we need. I remember vividly years ago an article in a magazine published by University Fellowship. The cover story was "We Are Driven," and it wasn't about "We're driven to succeed." It was taken from the commercial. We are driven. I just remembered a song by a Christian songwriter who said that there goes a big car that's driving that man. There goes a cigar that's smoking that man. What are you doing with your priorities? This one author said that he encouraged families during when those commercials came on, that the whole family would stand up and yell at the TV, "Who are you kidding?" To remind us that we can't be satisfied. But do we have the courage and the faithfulness to learn how to be unconformed to the world, that part of the world? Brother Bill has experienced this, and I've experienced this, and others. Not that I'm generous like I need to be, but I have learned when I had no way to pay the bills that I need to know how to be generous. As I've mentioned, I had the support and encouragement of a family of faith to help sustain me through that. And then I have to ask the question, what about those people who don't have that? What about those people who are out there without those relationships, without that faith family, without that support? How are they going to respond? Other than with desperation. And our call is to help them realize hope. One of the problems, I believe, with the churches, a lot of the churches here, and at times we fall into this, is, oh, we're a church that meets needs. We need to be a church that meets the need. The need of people coming to faith in Christ. And then with that, addressing the other needs that go with that. And sometimes you feed the person first, and sometimes you teach the person first. but you don't exclude one or the other. I think I've told you about a fellow. I never met him. We talked on the phone a lot when I was with him at the translation center. He was a volunteer chaplain down in Corpus. He died before I ever got a chance to meet him. And you knew it was going to be a great day when you answer the phone and what you hear is, "Hey man, God bless you, man." And that's the, oh, this is good. But nothing pleased him more than to take a bag full of tamales down to the corner and hand them out and then start preaching the word. Because he says, "You need this, but not as much as you need this." And I related this. He told me his story because he was an ex-con, and said that he was one of those guys that would tear the pages out of the Bibles that were given in a roll of cigarettes. So the Bible paper is pretty good stuff, you know. Good smokes. It's one reason that the Translation Center started printing the inexpensive version just on this pulp that wouldn't be used for anything like that. But he said, I was one of those guys that tear the page out and roll my cigarettes. And the fellow told the chaplain, and the chaplain was gracious. He didn't confront me. He just gave me, when I asked for a Bible, he said, sure, Alex, I'll give you another Bible. And when I opened it up, I had a note written on the front. "Alex, you can smoke Matthew, Mark, or Luke. Don't smoke John." He said, I figured that was him telling me that I should read the Gospel of John, and I started reading the Gospel of John. And I got to that part where it told me that God gave His Son to die for me. My life's never been the same since. And He would go back into the jails. He would go out on the streets. He went to prisons in scary places, Colombia, Salvador, because of his faith. Because he didn't smoke John, but he read it and found the Savior. I'm kind of getting off there. Which I tend to do. And then the other thing is with the spiritual slumber, and he's saying, you know, wake up. Yes. No.
Thinking of the church as an organism, it lives, it dies, it thrives, it gets sleepy, it gets bored. I think the biggest challenge for any church is for its leadership to, week by week, make the constituents uncomfortable, irritated, perhaps a little bit argumentative. And that's one thing that maybe this class is able to do. But by stimulating thought and irritating, like getting under each other's skin, we think out things in a deeper way. And the depth leads us to action that we wouldn't bother to take if we were still asleep.
What I thought about there was the creation of a pearl. Is that bit of sand that irritates and bothers the oyster, that allows the surface to begin to build, and trying to protect itself from that irritation is something that people prize and value greatly. There's truth in the Proverbs. Is like iron sharpens iron, so brother sharpens brother. We're called to do that for each other. by the way, the fellow that wrote the song, there goes a big car and he's driving that man, called his music style 10 minutes. Then she's raising her hands for 10 minutes. Calls his music style Christian grit. And he said of himself that every person is part of the body, and every part of the body is important and valuable, and ensuring that the church is whole and progressing as it should. He says, I'm the armpit. He says, my job is to remind the church that sometimes it doesn't smell so good. And we have that with us as well. What? It's easy to read the text and so forth because, for instance, in the message to Sardis, he says, remember and keep, remember this and keep doing this and repent. But he's going to wake up wake up and become thriving again, be valid again. So the Odyssey is just, you put your priorities in the wrong place. I'm where true value is found. I'm where true wealth and satisfaction is found. You need to buy from me the gold and buy from me the garments and find in me the salve to open your eyes, heal your eyes and open them to the truth. The reason that I wanted to ask that question about the live heresy or dead orthodoxy is because I've been on both sides of that. Not just both sides of the heresy and the orthodoxy. I've probably been there too, the heresy and the orthodoxy, but I've been on both sides of that question. Sometimes I would say this, sometimes I would say that. But I think I would rather be in a situation where the spiritual activity of the church is so strong that we risk that heresy. That we risk someone taking us the wrong direction and then trust that the Spirit of God will open eyes and gently guide us back to where we need to be. In our time, we're not going to have people burning at the stake over their beliefs because the heretics were treated unkindly. I've mentioned before one of the groups through history that I've had the greatest respect for, the Mennonites, and the Baptists, which really doesn't mean adult Baptists, if they were baptizing adults. And during the Middle Ages, they're the ones that were persecuted and killed by the Roman Catholics and the Protestants. And oh, by the way, they were pacifists. There was a great story of a Mennonite man who was being chased by someone who was going to take him back to be put on trial and executed. And he was a small man managed to go across a frozen body of water. The person chasing him, wearing his boots and heavy clothing, fell through the ice. Was going to drown. The Mennonite man had his chance to escape. He turned around, crawled back out on the ice, hauled the man out of the water, knowing he was going to be arrested on the spot. An act of grace, an act of courage, an act of faith. So the persecution will come in our culture, again, when we look so distinctive, when we look so much like Jesus, that the community around us is really uncomfortable. And heresies may come when we are thriving to teach and push forward and try to realize what it means to be the body of Christ. And I'm convinced that even if the teaching goes this way, or teaching goes that way, away from where the Holy Spirit intends, that He will call us back. He is always faithful. He was always good. As we heard this morning from Drew, those who've already been there, there's no limit on the grace. And we have that opportunity to move forward, trusting that if we're wrong, we pull back. I'd much rather risk being accused of deviating from the road than having the Lord say, why were you sitting there all that time? So let's pray. Father, you are holy, you are mighty, and you are good. You have shown yourself in power. You've shown yourself in mercy. You've shown yourself in an unexplainable love. You allowed your one and only to die on a cross for us. Father, help us as a people who claim His name to be faithful, to be persistent, and to listen. To never be contentious, but never back down from the truth. Father, there may be persecutions in the future. Give us strength to face those. There may be heresies, false teachings that emerge. Give us the wisdom to find truth and confront those. But I pray that we will never be found sitting still. I ask this in Jesus. Thank you.